Hello everybody, let's talk about Warhammer 40k terrain. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, right, it says terrain makes or breaks a game. If you go into a shop and they've just put 5 pieces of terrain down, or you're doing a tournament and they put 5 pieces of terrain down and you're used to playing in that kind of game, then you're really missing out. You really are missing out. And you're not really seeing the benefits of terrain either. Terrain needs to cover the board. It needs to be fences, hedges, buildings, hills, trees, all mixed and matched. And if you get enough terrain like I have, and you can make different types of games out from it, even better. So terrain really makes the game. Now, I'm quite good at reading a game, or reading a map. But when you only got 5 pieces of terrain down, there's nothing to read. It's just 5 pieces of terrain and the tactics go straight out the window. So I'll see what I recommend. Every now and again, you'll get a box set coming up from Games Workshop with a really good set of stuff in it. Like, there's a load of buildings in one of them. £60, you've got a load of buildings. They've stopped making them now. Then you had the board game, I can't remember what they call it now. Squad based one, 5-man squad shooting each other. They got like, you had like churches and stuff in it, but that was a really good set of terrain that for the price. The box set itself, right, was more than paid for by the terrain that you got in it. This is what I'm talking about. When you see these board games come out and the terrain is obviously worth more than the board game, buy the board game. Get the terrain that way. You get a lot of terrain really quickly. And it's a really good way of doing it. Then, and to take a tip out of David from Stronghold Games in Hull, all they do, I mean I do mine differently, but all they do is they'll spray a base colour and then put a wash over the whole thing. What is a wash? Well, you can either use Game Workshop's washes or some other company's washes, or you can just water down your paints to the point where they are water. Add a bit of a flow improver or whatever else, or even better, right, if you water it down with paint thinner, you know, the paint thinner you get with airbrushes, you know, so it evaporates really quickly. So when you put it on the paint, it evaporates and dries really fast. Use that and just brush it all over everything and let it run wherever it wants to run into the grooves. And then get the paints and just dry brush over the top to clean up any surface areas whilst leaving the grooves dirty and horrible. And it's done, it's instantly done, it's good enough, it looks really nice. It might not be brilliant compared to other people's terrain, but you'd love it. If you're not good at terrain, you'd love it because it's nice, simple and easy. You can do it in a day. Works for buildings mostly though. As for hills and stuff, Luke APS, I think he is on Finger, he got a load of tips on making hills. I could tell you, I use foam board as a base, then I use this spray foam that dries into like polystyrene type thing, and I carve it up into hills. Then I cover it in tile adhesive, because tile adhesive is a bit flexible. It doesn't crack as easy as other fillers, so it's stronger and it takes a few knocks. And then what I do then is I spray it. And then I use an airbrush and I'll spray different colours on to get a nice gradient effect. Then I'll dry brush the rocks. You start with a dark grey for base colour, dry brush it white, you know, or light grey, depending on your fancy. If you do it white, you've got to be careful. If you do it too strong, it's obviously white. If you do it just right, it'll go light grey when it dries. You can put a wash on that as well, right? Then I glue a bit of stuff on top, maybe some flock. Right, or maybe I'll put some sand on first and then spray it and then dry brush the sand. Lots of different ways of doing it. If anybody's interested in that kind of thing, I can explain it in more detail to you. Just let me know. It's quite cheap to make and it's quite fun. It's just getting hold of the parts initially involves you going to places you might not normally go to. But yeah. Anyway, terrain, yeah. If you set out your boards with terrain, you know, like all these cheap models that you get, or you look out for these buildings and you place 6 or 7 of them down on the board, that's a start. That's your basic start right there. 6 or 7, not 5, 6 or 7. If you're doing hills, you need quite a few hills of different sizes, and preferably hills your men can stand on. A hill that you can't stand on is just an obstacle that blocks line of sight. A hill they can stand on allows them to climb over it. Now this is where the fun starts. You start making hedges and things. Now I don't know if you know. In fact, have I got any spare? Yeah, I'll be right back. Right then. If you want to make hedges, you can pay a small fortune for them, or you can just go and buy a set of these that are used for cleaning your pots. You know the types. They're a bit abrasive and you gets off all the bits off your plates and your pans. Then what you do is you fold them. Right? You can fold, depending on the height you want the hedges to be, just keep folding them. Right? Preferably not so they have round edges, and you cut it so they get it flat. And then once you've got it folded and you've got a few of them like that, get another one. Feel like that. Glue it together. Right? So they're glued together so they become thick. Cut the top so it's flat. So you cut the top so it's flat, glue it all together, right? Then you get this spray on glue, or any glue that'll work, spray it all over it, dip it in some flock or some grass, stuff like that, right? Or whatever, just to give it a bit of a texture other than that, although you could get away with that texture if you want. And then spray it different colours, you know, the colours you want it to be. And you can even, because it's got a texture, you could dry brush it as well. So you can make it look really nice. And then glue it to a bit of foam board or a base, a bit of cardboard, and you've got yourself a hedge. Dead easy to make. Again, if anybody wants any tips on terrain like this, just ask. I mean, Luke ABS is doing a great job of this kind of thing, right? He started a few years ago, and he's one of the best. He's on YouTube, but I've been doing this since first edition. I don't do it as much as he does, but in first edition there was no terrain. You had to make your own, and I created all kinds of things, just like Luke does. But Luke's already got the videos up there for you. It won't necessarily be like this, you know, as simple as this, but they are quite easy. You know, it is worthwhile. Another tip for you as well, you know, the plaster. You know, they're used for making pots on arms when you break it around. Very useful stuff that, although it does chip. One of the upgrades I made was going from plaster to tile adhesive, because used in the same situation where you smother it all over the polystyrene, you don't leave white marks as often with the polyfill, well not polyfill, with the tile adhesive as you do with the plaster. But the plaster is really good at making something solid, and you can still cover it in adhesive to protect it if you wanted to. So all material you need to think with. You don't necessarily have to collect loads of useless junk and recyclable objects, right? But you know, sometimes they come in useful. Anyway, once you've got all your terrain and stuff laid out, your 7 or 8 bits laid on the board, and you've got your hedges all laid out and everything else, and you've got your flock and whatnot down, and your stones if you're using any like that. Remember, stones get everywhere, so you've got to really clean up after yourself if you use them. Right, and you've made your own things. Like, for instance, there are some seeds that look like palm cones that drop off of plants in the autumn. In fact, most of the year they drop off. I dip them in green paint, glue them to a base. They look like a conifer, a small conifer. Great for lining roads and stuff with. But you do all that. You put all that down on the base, and suddenly your angles, your line of sight angles, are changing. You get some situations that require rules that Games Workshop simply don't cover, right? They don't cover. For instance, and here's an example, right? You've got a window there, and I've got a rifle here, and I'm looking through that window, and at the other side there's 2 trees like that. There's a window, then 2 trees, then there's a fence with grating like that, and you can see a guy there through all this. Games Workshop say you can take the shot. It's a ridiculous shot. Now you think the guy's moved along like that. You don't see him. You don't know when he's going to appear. By the time you know he's there, he's gone, right? It's a ridiculous shot. So when you get when you've got the kind of detailed terrain that I like to field, you need rules. You need rules of your own. The GW ones don't work. First of all, if you've got a ridiculous shot like that, you can't take it. You've got to be clear. You don't just make this up as you go. Right? You've got to state these clearly at the beginning of the game so they're fully understood. So any ridiculous shots like for instance the AdMech buildings. If you build the AdMech buildings so they're on the raised platforms and you've got all the legs together, you can't shoot through the legs. But the archways, any gaps with no legs, you can shoot through them. We say that straight away. You might be able to see people through the legs, but you can't shoot through the legs. It blocks line of sight. Right? So the doorways, yes, you know, with the archways you can shoot. Someone stood next to a window, they can shoot out and you can shoot in. But if they step 1 inch away from the window, they can't shoot out and you can't shoot in. It stops the ridiculous arguments and the ridiculous shots, and it makes everything simple. Now, going up and down terrain, I always say if there's a ladder, you can automatically go up the ladder. You know, you have to pay the points for it, you know, movements, but you can go up the ladder. If it's a really long ladder, you still get to the top. You know, you can't stop halfway, because obviously you'd fall off and there's no way of putting the model there. But you automatically get to the top. And if it means your full movement distance is more than exceeded, then basically you start at the bottom, you end at the top. Right? You don't move beyond the ladder at the top. So we just do things like that. And usually you can close assault men directly above you or directly below you, unless it's out of reach, right? If it's on the ground and someone's on the first floor and the first floor is way above you, then you can't close assault them. But if you're on the first floor and the next floor is about 6 inches away, you can still close assault them. We allow pointy sticks. The ground and the first floor we treat a bit differently, simply because you do get some really high platforms, and sometimes the whole point of being on a platform is strategic, you know, because you can't be close assaulted up there. You need assault troops to get up there. So we accept that, and we don't nullify that strategy by allowing attacks from the ground if it's too high. Right, so as a general, you've got to get onto the first floor before all these rules start applying. Once you're on the first floor, you can attack the floor above you and below you, right? Unless it's a ground floor, obviously. And that's it. Also, once you're in terrain, the cover's gone. If you're in the terrain with somebody else in the same terrain, the cover doesn't apply because you're both in the terrain at the same time. That stops stupid cover rules coming into play. Games Workshop change them all the time. This kind of gets around all the arguments. Also, if you stood on a hill, right, or on a piece of terrain, even if you're clearly visible, you're in cover. To the outside, that is, right? If you're on a hill, you know, with somebody else, then it depends on the line of sight. If you're in a building with somebody else, then the cover's nullified for both of you when you shoot at each other. From the outside, you're still in cover, but from inside, you might as well be next to each other. Hills we treat differently because it's more natural, and hills are designed to break up line of sight and crawl over. So you do get a bit of cover from people in hills, providing there's something intervening, something between you. But when you're actually on the hill, regardless of how clear you are after the outside, you're automatically in cover. Right, so we do hills, so you can stand on hills in cover. It's assumed there's rocks and things around you can use for cover, and we do it that way. And it stops arguments and it gives hills a meaning. And it's a simple rule. These are all simple rules, right? They don't require much thought or memory, or there's no special conditions. They apply every time. I don't use Games Workshop theory rules as a rule, you know, building rules. I use my own. So anyhow, so what we do, start the game, right, lay all the terrain out. Both me and my partner lay all the terrain out, so, my opponent, so we get to make it fair. Then, only then, do we roll off to see which sides we take. We have these cards, open war cards, which sometimes are very good at doing random sides. So you never know when the terrain's laid out if you're going to be on the good side or a bad side. So the terrain tends to be laid out fair because people don't want to be caught out by a badly placed terrain. It does, it makes a much fairer game. But once you know what side you want, you start placing your men, then you do things normally. But what we do, once the terrain's all laid out, that's when the rules come in. We say, right, you see these buildings here, right? Well, the window rule applies there. If you stood next to the window, you can shoot out and be shot at. If you stood away from it, you can't. You see the admit things there? Yeah, well, these legs here, you can't shoot from them, but you can shoot through that open archway there. That's fine. The hills, they all count as cover. Okay, mate? Yeah, right. Away we go. We all know the rules. No arguing. Terrain works great. Now, when people see a line of sight, you know that it's going between two hills through a doorway and through a window, they know we've got a standard rule. You can't take that shot. That shot there is a ridiculous shot. And if you imagine this camera here is the view, right? And you've got a gun there, and this is the guy you're shooting at. Literally. You can't say, oh, I can see him over there, because you can't, because it's out of sight of the camera. You only know he's there when he comes into view, and by the time you realise that, he's gone. So the shots are ridiculous. We don't allow them, right? And this works quite well. You could have a clear shot. We do it, you can shoot through your own troops, but not your opponents. Standard line of sight for characters and stuff like that. All the GW rules, standard as for shooting. But it works. Also, because we got a lot more terrain on the board, the chances of you being in a position where you're about to charge an opponent from a hidden position, right, is dramatically increased, right? I had one point where I had a defiler, right, about to charge a squad of men, and it couldn't be shot at because it was hidden behind a building. They couldn't see a defiler. My son was going ape. He was saying to me, he says, that's ridiculous. I said, that's the rules. Standard shooting rules apply when you're doing Overwatch, and he can't see. Right? It doesn't say you shoot when he comes around the corner. It says you've got to be able to shoot at the start of the move, and you can't see him, so you can't shoot. Like that. And anyhow, it means that happens more often. So you start using cover before a charge to protect against Overwatch. It introduces elements of strategy into the game that don't always come up when you've just got 5 pieces on the board and that's it. This is why terrain is so important, and why you should always, 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 always try your best to build up your terrain collection along with your model collection. Or if your local store is where you play, help them build up their collection. Donate pieces, make them up and donate pieces. I'm sure they'll appreciate it, right? They'll probably give you some discounts for it at some point if they're decent guys, and everybody that plays there will get to benefit from the extra terrain, right? And if they do have enough terrain and they just don't put them out, ask them if you can do the board yourself, right, with the terrain that they've got in the cupboard, right? Because more terrain means better games. And it also breaks up the line of sight. And some shooty armies might do really well on a 5-piece board, 5 pieces of terrain. But when you put proper terrain down, suddenly their line of sight's limited, and it becomes about fire arcs, where you can see how far you can see. And you put all your main group together so they can shoot in one direction or another direction. Anybody who walks past that gap gets annihilated. It becomes like that. It's much more strategic, it's a much better game, and it keeps you thinking. Anyhow, that's terrain for you. Don't forget, if you want some tips on terrain, just leave it below. I'm actually really good at that. I'm really good. Most of the terrain I've built over the years has been made and designed by me with no help from anybody else. I've built churches, castles, all kinds of stuff from scratch. In recent years, I've been using foam board, which is really good stuff. You use that and hot glue, and you can build it really quickly, and then you just cover it in sand and grit. Cut a few squares off from your cornflakes packet, stick it on there. There you go. You've got a brick, sticking out of the other bricks, and you can dry brush it, whatnot. And you cover it in tile adhesive again to cover up any edges and that, because that's really good stuff. It's strong and it takes an impact, and maybe throw a bit of grit onto it, to be a pebble dash effect if you want. If you're doing cottages, that's a really good effect on walls. These are all good ideas. But anyhow, this isn't about making terrain. I mean, right now I'm in a difficult position. I can't really make the terrain in front of you to show you. Not yet, but if you're interested, you tell me below and I'll see what I can do in the future, because like I said, I'm good at this stuff. I know what I'm doing. Right, in fact I'm better at making terrain than playing 40k. So anyway, see you later. Questions below if you have any.